Field Marshal Horatio Herbert Kitchener, 1st Earl Kitchener, KG, KP, GCB, OM, GCSI, GCMG, GCIE, PC, /KTNR/ June 24, 1850 – June 5, 1916, was a senior British Army officer and colonial administrator who won notoriety for his imperial campaigns, most especially his scorched earth policy against the Boers and his establishment of concentration camps during the Second Boer War, and later played a central role in the early part of the First World War. Kitchener was credited in 1898 for winning the Battle of Omdurman and securing control of the Sudan, for which he was made Lord Kitchener of Khartoum, becoming a qualifying peer and of mid-rank as an earl. As Chief of Staff, 1902, in the Second Boer War he played a key role in Lord Roberts' conquest of the Boer republics, then succeeded Roberts as Commander-in-Chief, by which time Boer forces had taken to guerrilla fighting and British forces imprisoned Boer civilians in concentration camps. His term as Commander-in-Chief, 1902-09, of the Army in India saw him quarrel with another eminent proconsul, the Viceroy Lord Curzon, who eventually resigned. Kitchener then returned to Egypt as British agent and consul general, de facto administrator. In 1914, at the start of the First World War, Kitchener became Secretary of State for War, a cabinet minister. One of the few to foresee a long war, lasting for at least 3 years, and with the authority to act effectively on that perception, he organized the largest volunteer army that Britain had seen, and oversaw a significant expansion of materials production to fight on the Western Front. Despite having warned of the difficulty of provisioning for a long war, he was blamed for the shortage of shells in the spring of 1915, one of the events leading to the formation of a coalition government, and stripped of his control over munitions and strategy. On June 5, 1916, Kitchener was making his way to Russia to attend negotiations, on HMS Hampshire, when it struck a German mine 1.5 miles, 2.4 kilometers, west of the Orkney Islands, Scotland, and sank. Kitchener was among 737 who died. Early life. Kitchener was born in Ballylongford near Listowel, County Kerry, in Ireland, son of Army officer Henry Horatio Kitchener, 1805–1894, and Frances Anne Chevalier, d. 1864, daughter of John Chevalier, a priest, and his third wife, Elizabeth, née Cole. His father had only recently bought land in Ireland, under a scheme to encourage the purchase of land, after selling his commission. They then moved to Switzerland, where the young Kitchener was educated at Montreux, then at the Royal Military Academy, Woolwich. Pro-French and eager to see action, he joined a French field ambulance unit in the Franco-Prussian War. His father took him back to Britain after he caught pneumonia while ascending in a balloon to see the French Army of the Loire in action. Commissioned into the Royal Engineers on January 4, 1871, his service in France had violated British neutrality, and he was reprimanded by the Duke of Cambridge, the Commander-in-Chief. He served in Palestine, Egypt, and Cyprus as a surveyor, learned Arabic, and prepared detailed topographical maps of the areas. His brother, Lieutenant General Sir Walter Kitchener, had also entered the army, and was governor of Bermuda from 1908 to 1912. Survey of Western Palestine. In 1874, aged 24, Kitchener was assigned by the Palestine Exploration Fund to a mapping survey of the Holy Land, replacing Charles Tyrwhitt Drake, who had died of malaria. By then an officer in the Royal Engineers, Kitchener joined fellow officer Claude R. Conder. Between 1874 and 1877 they surveyed Palestine, returning to England only briefly in 1875 after an attack by locals at Safed, in Galilee. Condor and Kitchener's expedition became known as the Survey of Western Palestine because it was largely confined to the area west of the Jordan River. The survey collected data on the topography and toponymy of the area, as well as local flora and fauna. The results of the survey were published in an 8-volume series, with Kitchener's contribution in the first 3 tomes, Condor and Kitchener 1881-1885. This survey has had a lasting effect on the Middle East for several reasons. It serves as the basis for the grid system used in the modern maps of Israel and Palestine. The data compiled by Condor and Kitchener are still consulted by archaeologists and geographers working in the southern Levant. The survey itself effectively delineated and defined the political borders of the southern Levant. For example, the modern border between Israel and Lebanon is established at the point in Upper Galilee where Condor and Kitchener's survey stopped. In 1878, having completed the survey of western Palestine, Kitchener was sent to Cyprus to undertake a survey of that newly acquired British protectorate. He became vice-consul in Anatolia in 1879. Egypt. Kitchener became a Freemason in 1883. He was initiated in Cairo at La Concordia Lodge No. 1226, English Constitution, and was the first Grand Master of the District Grand Lodge of Egypt Sudan, under the United Grand Lodge of England, created in 1899. On January 4, 1883, Kitchener was promoted to captain, given the Turkish rank Bimbashi, major, and dispatched to Egypt where he took part in the reconstruction of the Egyptian army. Egypt had recently become a British puppet state, its army led by British officers, although still nominally under the sovereignty of the Khedive, Egyptian monarch, and his nominal overlord the Ottoman Sultan of Turkey. Kitchener became second in command of an Egyptian cavalry regiment in February 1883, and then took part in the failed expedition to relieve Charles George Gordon in the Sudan in late 1884. Fluent in Arabic, Kitchener preferred the company of the Egyptians over the British, and the company of no one over the Egyptians, writing in 1884 that, "I have become such a solitary bird that I often think I were happier alone." Kitchener spoke Arabic so well that he was able to effortlessly adopt the dialects of the different Bedouin tribes of Egypt and the Sudan. Promoted to brevet major on October 8, 1884 and to brevet lieutenant colonel on June 15, 1885, he became the British member of the Zanzibar Boundary Commission in July 1885. He became governor of the Egyptian provinces of Eastern Sudan and Red Sea Littoral, which in practice consisted of little more than the port of Suakin, in September 1886, and led his forces in action against the followers of the Mahdi at Handub in January 1888, when he was injured in the jaw. Kitchener was promoted to brevet colonel on April 11, 1888 and to the substantive rank of major on July 20, 1889 and led the Egyptian cavalry at the Battle of Toski in August 1889. At the beginning of 1890 he was appointed Inspector General of the Egyptian Police before moving to the position of Adjutant General of the Egyptian Army in December of the same year and Sirdar, Commander-in-Chief, of the Egyptian Army with the local rank of Brigadier in April 1892. Kitchener was worried that, although his mustache was bleached white by the sun, his blonde hair refused to turn grey, making it harder for Egyptians to take him seriously. His appearance added to his mystique, his long legs made him appear taller, whilst a cast in his eye made people feel he was looking right through them. Kitchener, at 6 feet 2 inches, towered over most of his contemporaries. Sir Evelyn Baring, the de facto British ruler of Egypt, thought Kitchener the most able soldier I have come across in my time. In 1890, a War Office evaluation of Kitchener concluded, a good brigadier, very ambitious, not popular, but has of late greatly improved in tact and manner, a fine gallant soldier and good linguist and very successful in dealing with Orientals. Sudan and Khartoum. In 1896, the British Prime Minister, Lord Salisbury, was concerned with keeping France out of the Horn of Africa. A French expedition under the command of Jean-Baptiste Marchand had left Dakar in March 1896 with the aim of conquering the Sudan, seizing control of the Nile as it flowed into Egypt, and forcing the British out of Egypt, thus restoring Egypt to the place within the French sphere of influence that it had had prior to 1882. Salisbury feared that if the British did not conquer the Sudan, the French would. He had supported Italy's ambitions to conquer Ethiopia in the hope that the Italians would keep the French out of Ethiopia. The Italian attempt to conquer Ethiopia, however, was going very badly by early 1896, and ended with the Italians being annihilated at the Battle of Etowah in March 1896. In March 1896, with the Italians visibly failing and the Mahdaya state threatening to conquer Eritrea, Salisbury ordered Kitchener to invade northern Sudan, ostensibly for the purpose of distracting the Ansar, whom the British called dervishes, from attacking the Italians. Kitchener won victories at the Battle of Firkay in June 1896 and the Battle of Hoffer in September 1896, earning him national fame in the United Kingdom and promotion to Major General on September 25, 1896. Kitchener's cold personality and his tendency to drive his men hard made him widely disliked by his fellow officers. One officer wrote about Kitchener in September 1896, "He was always inclined to bully his own entourage, as some men are rude to their wives. He was inclined to let off his spleen on those around him. He was often morose and silent for hours together, he was even morbidly afraid of showing any feeling or enthusiasm, and he preferred to be misunderstood rather than be suspected of human feeling." Kitchener had served on the Wolseley expedition to rescue General Gordon at Khartoum, and was convinced that the expedition failed because Wolseley had used boats coming up the Nile to bring his supplies. Kitchener wanted to build a railroad to supply the Anglo-Egyptian army, and assigned the task of constructing the Sudan Military Railroad to a Canadian railroad builder, Percy Gerard, for whom he had specifically asked. Kitchener achieved further successes at the Battle of Atbara in April 1898, and then the Battle of Omdurman in September 1898. After marching to the walls of Khartoum, he placed his army into a crescent shape with the Nile to the rear, together with the gunboats in support. This enabled him to bring overwhelming firepower against any attack of the Ansar from any direction, though with the disadvantage of having his men spread out thinly, with hardly any forces in reserve. Such an arrangement could have proven disastrous if the Ansar had broken through the thin Khaki line. At about 5 a.m. on September 2, 1898, a huge force of Ansar, under the command of the Khalifa himself, came out of the fort at Omdurman, marching under their black banners inscribed with Quranic quotations in Arabic. This led Bennett Burleigh, the Sudan correspondent of the Daily Telegraph, to write, "It was not alone the reverberation of the tread of horses and men's feet I heard and seemed to feel as well as hear, but a voiced continuous shouting and chanting the dervish invocation and battle. Challenge Allah-e Allah-Rasul Allah el-Mahdi," they reiterated in vociferous rising measure, as they swept over the intervening ground. Kitchener had the ground carefully studied so that his officers would know the best angle of fire, and had his army open fire on the Ansar first with artillery, then machine guns and finally rifles as the enemy advanced. A young Winston Churchill, serving as an army officer, wrote of what he saw: "A ragged line of men were coming on desperately, struggling forward in the face of the pitiless fire, black banners tossing and collapsing, white figures subsiding in dozens to the ground. Valiant men were struggling on through a hell of whistling metal, exploding shells, and spurting dust, suffering, despairing, dying." By about 8:30 a.m., much of the dervish army was dead. Kitchener ordered his men to advance, fearing that the Khalifa might escape with what was left of his army to the fort of Omdurman, forcing Kitchener to lay siege to it. Viewing the battlefield from horseback on the hill at Jebel Surghum, Kitchener commented, "Well, we have given them a damn good dusting." As the British and Egyptians advanced in columns, the Khalifa attempted to outflank and encircle the columns. This led to desperate hand-to-hand fighting. Churchill wrote of his own experience as the 21st Lancers cut their way through the Ansar. The collision was prodigious, and for perhaps 10 wonderful seconds, no man heeded his enemy. Terrified horses wedged in the crowd, bruised and shaken men, sprawling in heaps, struggled dazed and stupid, to their feet, panted and looked about them. The Lancers' onslaught carried them through the 12-men-deep Ansar line, with the Lancers losing about 70 dead while killing hundreds of the enemy. Following the annihilation of his army, the Khalifa ordered a retreat, and early in the afternoon, Kitchener rode in triumph into Omdurman and immediately ordered that the thousands of Christians enslaved by the Ansar were now all free people. Kitchener lost fewer than 500 men while killing about 11,000 and wounding 17,000 of the Ansar. Burleigh summed the general mood of the British troops: "At last, Gordon has been avenged and justified. The dervishes have been overwhelming routed, Mahdism has been smashed, while the Khalifa's capital of Omdurman has been stripped of its barbaric halo of sanctity and invulnerability." Kitchener promptly had the Mahdi's tomb blown up and his bones scattered. Queen Victoria, who had wept when she heard of General Gordon's death, now wept for the man who had vanquished Gordon, asking whether it had been really necessary for Kitchener to desecrate the Mahdi's tomb. In a letter to his mother, Churchill wrote that the victory at Omdurman had been disgraced by the inhuman slaughter of the wounded and Kitchener is responsible for this. There is no evidence that Kitchener ordered his men to shoot the wounded Ansar on the field of Omdurman, but he did give before the battle what the British journalist Mark Urban called a mixed message, saying that mercy should be given, while at the same time saying remember Gordon and that the enemy were all murderers of Gordon. The victory at Omdurman made Kitchener into a popular war hero, and gave him a reputation for efficiency and as a man who got things done. The journalist G. W. Stevens wrote in the Daily Mail that he is more like a machine than a man. You feel that he ought to be patented and shown with pride at the Paris International Exhibition. British Empire, Exhibit No. 1 or Concours, The Sudan Machine. The shooting of the wounded at Omdurman, along with the desecration of the Mahdi's tomb, gave Kitchener a reputation for brutality that was to dog him for the rest of his life, and posthumously. After Omdurman, Kitchener opened a special sealed letter from Salisbury that told him that Salisbury's real reason for ordering the conquest of the Sudan was to prevent France from moving into the Sudan, and that the talk of avenging Gordon had been just a pretext. Salisbury's letter ordered Kitchener to head south as soon as possible to evict Marchand before he got a chance to become well established on the Nile. On September 18, 1898, Kitchener arrived at the French fort at Fashoda and informed Marchand that he and his men had to leave the Sudan at once, a request Marchand refused, leading to a tense standoff as French and British soldiers aimed their weapons at each other. During what became known as the Fashoda Incident, Britain and France almost went to war with each other. The Fashoda incident caused much jingoism and chauvinism on both sides of the English Channel. However, at Fashoda itself, despite the standoff with the French, Kitchener established cordial relations with Marchand. They agreed that the tricolour would fly equally with the Union Jack and the Egyptian flag over the disputed fort at Fashoda. Kitchener was a Francophile who spoke fluent French, and despite his reputation for brusque rudeness was very diplomatic and tactful in his talks with Marchand, for example, congratulating him on his achievement in crossing the Sahara in an epic trek from Dakar to the Nile. In November 1898, the crisis ended when the French agreed to withdraw from the Sudan. Several factors persuaded the French to back down. These included British naval superiority, the prospect of an Anglo-French war leading to the British gobbling up the entire French colonial empire after the defeat of the French navy, the pointed statement from the Russian Emperor Nicholas II that the Franco-Russian alliance applied only to Europe, and that Russia would not go to war against Britain for the sake of an obscure fort in the Sudan in which no Russian interests were involved, and the possibility that Germany might take advantage of an Anglo-French war to strike France. Kitchener became Governor-General of the Sudan in September 1898, and began a program of restoring good governance. The program had a strong foundation, based on education at Gordon Memorial College as its centerpiece, and not simply for the children of the local elites, for children from anywhere could apply to study. He ordered the mosques of Khartoum rebuilt, instituted reforms which recognized Friday the Muslim holy day as the official day of rest, and guaranteed freedom of religion to all citizens of the Sudan. He attempted to prevent evangelical Christian missionaries from trying to convert Muslims to Christianity. At this stage of his career, Kitchener was keen to exploit the press, cultivating G. W. Stevens of the Daily Mail, who wrote a book with Kitchener to Khartoum. Later, as his legend had grown, he was able to be rude to the press, on one occasion in the Second Boer War, bellowing, "Get out of my way, you drunken swabs." He was created Baron Kitchener of Khartoum and of Aspal in the county of Suffolk, on October 31, 1898. Anglo-Boer War. During the Second Boer War, Kitchener arrived in South Africa with Lord Roberts on the RMS Dunatar Castle along with massive British reinforcements in December 1899. Officially holding the title of Chief of Staff, he was in practice a second-in-command and was present at the relief of Kimberley before leading an unsuccessful frontal assault at the Battle of Partabag in February 1900. Kitchener was mentioned in dispatches from Lord Roberts several times during the early part of the war. In a dispatch from March 1900, Lord Roberts wrote how he was greatly indebted to him for his counsel and cordial support on all occasions. Following the defeat of the conventional Boer forces, Kitchener succeeded Roberts as overall commander in November 1900. He was also promoted to lieutenant general on November 29, 1900 and to local general on December 12, 1900. He subsequently inherited and expanded the successful strategies devised by Roberts to force the Boer commandos to submit, including concentration camps and the burning of farms. Conditions in the concentration camps, which had been conceived by Roberts as a form of control of the families whose farms he had destroyed, began to degenerate rapidly as the large influx of Boers outstripped the ability of the minuscule British force to cope. The camps lacked space, food, sanitation, medicine, and medical care, leading to rampant disease and a very high death rate for those Boers who entered. Eventually 26,370 women and children, 81% were children, died in the concentration camps. The biggest critic of the camps was the Englishwoman, humanitarian, and welfare worker Emily Hobhouse. The Treaty of Vereeniging, ending the war, was signed in May 1902 following a tense 6 months. During this period Kitchener struggled against Sir Alfred Milner, the governor of the Cape Colony, and the British government. Milner was a hardline conservative and wanted forcibly to Anglicize the Afrikaans people, the Boers, and Milner and the British government wanted to assert victory by forcing the Boers to sign a humiliating peace treaty. Kitchener wanted a more generous compromise peace treaty that would recognize certain rights for the Afrikaners and promise future self-government. He even entertained a peace treaty proposed by Louis Botha and the other Boer leaders. Although he knew the British government would reject the offer, this would have maintained the sovereignty of the South African Republic and the Orange Free State while requiring them to sign a perpetual treaty of alliance with the UK and grant major concessions to the British, such as equal rights for English with Dutch in their countries, voting rights for Uitlanders, and a customs and railway union with the Cape Colony and Natal. Kitchener, who had been promoted to the substantive rank of general on June 1, 1902, was hosted to a farewell reception at Cape Town on June 23, and left for the United Kingdom in the SS Oratava on the same day. He received an enthusiastic welcome on his arrival the following month. Landing in Southampton on July 12, he was greeted by the corporation, who presented him with the freedom of the borough. In London, he was met at the train station by the Prince of Wales, drove in a procession through streets lined by military personnel from 70 different units and watched by thousands of people, and received a formal welcome at St. James's Palace. He also visited King Edward VII, Emperor of India, who was confined to his room recovering from his recent operation for appendicitis, but wanted to meet the general on his arrival and to personally bestow on him the insignia of the Order of Merit, O.M. Kitchener was created Viscount Kitchener of Khartoum and of the Vaal in the colony of Transvaal and of Espal in the county of Suffolk, on July 28, 1902. Court-martial of Breaker Morant. In the Breaker Morant case, 5 Australian officers and 1 English officer of an irregular unit, the Bushveld Carabiniers, were court-martialed for summarily executing 12 Boer prisoners, and also for the murder of a German missionary believed to be a Boer sympathizer, all under unwritten orders approved by Kitchener. The celebrated horseman and bush poet Lieutenant Harry Breaker Morant and Lieutenant Peter Handcock were found guilty, sentenced to death, and shot by firing squad at Petersburg on February 27, 1902. Their death warrants were personally signed by Kitchener. He reprieved a 3rd soldier, Lieutenant George Whitton, who served 28 months before being released. India. General Lord Kitchener was appointed Commander-in-Chief, India, in 1902 and immediately began the task of reorganizing the Indian Army. Kitchener's plan, the reorganization and redistribution of the army in India, recommended preparing the Indian Army for any potential war by reducing the size of fixed garrisons and reorganizing it into 2 armies, to be commanded by the splendidly named Generals Blood and Luck. While many of the Kitchener reforms were supported by the Viceroy, Lord Curzon of Kettleston, who had originally lobbied for Kitchener's appointment, the 2 men eventually came into conflict. Curzon wrote to Kitchener advising him that signing himself Kitchener of Khartoum took up too much time and space. Kitchener commented on the pettiness of this. Curzon simply signed himself Curzon as an hereditary peer, although he later took to signing himself Curzon of Kettleston. They also clashed over the question of military administration, as Kitchener objected to the system whereby transport and logistics were controlled by a military member of the Viceroy's Council. The Commander-in-Chief won the crucial support of the government in London, and the Viceroy chose to resign. Later events proved Curzon was right in opposing Kitchener's attempts to concentrate all military decision-making power in his own office. Although the offices of Commander-in-Chief and military member were now held by a single individual, senior officers could approach only the Commander-in-Chief directly. In order to deal with the military member, a request had to be made through the Army Secretary, who reported to the Indian government and had right of access to the Viceroy. There were even instances, when the 2 separate bureaucracies produced different answers to a problem, with the Commander-in-Chief disagreeing with himself as military member. This became known as the canonization of duality. Kitchener's successor, General Sir O'More Cray, was nicknamed No More K, and concentrated on establishing good relations with the Viceroy, Lord Hardinge. Kitchener presided over the Rawalpindi Parade in 1905 to honour the Prince and Princess of Wales' visit to India. That same year Kitchener founded the Indian Staff College at Quetta, now the Pakistani Command and Staff College, where his portrait still hangs. His term of office as Commander-in-Chief, India, was extended by 2 years in 1907. Kitchener was promoted to the highest army rank, Field Marshal, on September 10, 1909 and went on a tour of Australia and New Zealand. He aspired to be Viceroy of India, but the Secretary of State for India, John Morley, was not keen and hoped to send him instead to Malta as Commander-in-Chief of British forces in the Mediterranean, even to the point of announcing the appointment in the newspapers. Kitchener pushed hard for the viceroyalty, returning to London to lobby cabinet ministers and the dying King Edward VII, from whom, whilst collecting his field marshal's baton, Kitchener obtained permission to refuse the Malta job. However, Morley could not be moved. This was perhaps in part because Kitchener was thought to be a Tory. The Liberals were in office at the time, perhaps due to a Curzon-inspired whispering campaign, but most importantly because Morley, who was a Gladstonian and thus suspicious of imperialism, felt it inappropriate, after the recent grant of limited self-government under the 1909 Indian Councils Act, for a serving soldier to be viceroy. In the event, no serving soldier was appointed viceroy until Lord Wavell in 1943, during the Second World War. The Prime Minister, Herbert Henry Asquith, was sympathetic to Kitchener but was unwilling to overrule Morley, who threatened resignation, so Kitchener was finally turned down for the post of Viceroy of India in 1911. Return to Egypt. In June 1911 Kitchener then returned to Egypt as British agent and consul general in Egypt during the formal reign of Abbas Hilmi II as Khedive. At the time of the Agadir crisis, summer 1911, Kitchener told the Committee of Imperial Defence that he expected the Germans to walk through the French like partridges, and he informed Lord Esher that if they imagined that he was going to command the army in France he would see them damned first. He was created Earl Kitchener of Khartoum and of Broome in the county of Kent, on June 29, 1914. During this period he became a proponent of scouting and coined the phrase "once a scout, always a scout." First World War. 1914. Raising the new armies. At the outset of the First World War, the Prime Minister, Asquith, quickly had Lord Kitchener appointed Secretary of State for War. Asquith had been filling the job himself as a stopgap following the resignation of Colonel Seely over the Curragh incident earlier in 1914. Kitchener was in Britain on his annual summer leave, between June 23 and August 3, 1914, and had boarded a cross-channel steamer to commence his return trip to Cairo when he was recalled to London to meet with Asquith. War was declared at 11 p.m. the next day. Against cabinet opinion, Kitchener correctly predicted a long war that would last at least 3 years, require huge new armies to defeat Germany, and cause huge casualties before the end would come. Kitchener stated that the conflict would plumb the depths of manpower to the last million. A massive recruitment campaign began, which soon featured a distinctive poster of Kitchener, taken from a magazine front cover. It may have encouraged large numbers of volunteers, and has proven to be one of the most enduring images of the war, having been copied and parodied many times since. Kitchener built up the new armies as separate units because he distrusted the territorials from what he had seen with the French army in 1870. This may have been a mistaken judgment, as the British reservists of 1914 tended to be much younger and fitter than their French equivalents a generation earlier. Cabinet Secretary Maurice Hankey wrote of Kitchener, "The great outstanding fact is that within 18 months of the outbreak of the war, when he had found a people reliant on sea power, and essentially non-military in their outlook, he had conceived and brought into being, completely equipped in every way, a national army capable of holding its own against the armies of the greatest military power the world had ever seen." However, Ian Hamilton later wrote of Kitchener, "He hated organizations, he smashed organizations, he was a master of expedients." Deploying the BEF. At the War Council, August 5, Kitchener and Light General Sir Douglas Haig argued that the BEF should be deployed at Amiens, where it could deliver a vigorous counterattack once the route of German advance was known. Kitchener argued that the deployment of the BEF in Belgium would result in having to retreat and abandon much of its supplies almost immediately, as the Belgian army would be unable to hold its ground against the Germans. Kitchener was proved right, but given the belief in fortresses common at the time, it is not surprising that the War Council disagreed with him. Kitchener, believing Britain should husband her resources for a long war, decided at Cabinet, August 6, that the initial BEF would consist.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.